welcome to Crafty Chat, and this is our episode number 33. My name is Heidi. I am joined by Nancy and Lucy, and we have a very special guest today, Amanda. Yay! So thank you for joining us, Amanda, to be our guest, and so we can learn about you and what you do and what inspires you. So with that, I'm going to let you talk about yourself a little bit. Give your intro, your bio.
Great, thanks. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. I was super excited when you contacted me, so I'm happy to be here. So I am a graphic designer for the library. I'm one of three designers. I've been at the library for almost 6 years, which is kind of wild to think about now. So I do a lot of the print work that you see that goes out, and we all work together to come up with fun concepts and ideas and things for our patrons. And yeah, so it's been an interesting year, all working from home, but all of the stuff that we do it's mostly digital. So it has been a little bit of a change, but not too drastic. Although I miss my coworkers. So before that, I actually worked as a landscape architect and urban planner for about 10 years, and did that up until the most other recent economic crash type of thing. And then before that, actually, I studied geology. So it's been a little bit of an interesting creative path in terms of a career. And then also currently I teach an introductory sort of foundational class for the incoming graduate students in landscape architecture at U of M. I teach them how to draw like landscape architects. So it's an interesting experiment sometimes, because you're working with folks who are coming from a wide variety of backgrounds. Some who like to draw for pleasure, some who have never drawn much at all. And so that's always an interesting challenge. And then to see them grow in their skills during the course of the semester, and then their career through their whole program at U of M is really kind of fun too. So that was all online last fall. Teaching folks how to draw remotely is a bit of a challenge. At least it was for me the first time through. So yeah, so my work is sort of all over the place in terms of drawing and digital media, and just getting into textiles now.
Yeah, and that's what we love. We love having like multiple facets, I guess, to the creative process. It's interesting to think of landscape architecture, like drawing that, because I think of landscape being something so organic in shape, but architecture is very, structured and measured. I mean, you have to make it right or the building's going to fall over. So
right. And it's interesting. It's an interesting process because you have ideas in your head about what a place or a city or a plaza or a neighborhood could look like. And you have to get those ideas out of your head and onto paper or another medium, digital medium, to be able to communicate with your clients and the community about what that looks like. And I think for me, that's what was always the most interesting aspect of landscape architecture, was the visual communication pieces, and starting to break down what systems looked like, and using diagrams to show where water goes or where the shadows fall on a site, or in a downtown area. So it's thinking through all of those little like aspects of the spaces around us, and being able to communicate those to other folks so that they can see your vision too. And that was what I really enjoyed the most. And then I transferred sort of from landscape architecture to graphic design, because I realized that about myself, that I liked that part of it more. I liked making maps. I liked making diagrams. I liked using color and pattern to communicate, whether it was, some sort of wacky graphic design thing or something, a real world place. And so once I realized that about myself and what I didn't like doing about as a landscape architect. The building part of it, I didn't find as interesting, or I didn't have the same skill set there. So let other people do that. And so let, me do the graphics. And then
it's just wild though, because I didn't even consider, when you're doing this planning, you have to understand how the plant is going to grow, or the tree, like how you have to know about the biology or the botany, I guess, of those items. And also meteorology, like understanding the weather and like the lighting patterns and everything. Sure. And really have to pull from so many different subjects to design.
Yeah. Well, and how other materials work too. Yeah. So how concrete or other three-dimensional site furnishings or signage, and how does all of that work together to create an experience in a place. And so again, it's one of those things where I realized that my skills and interests sort of, veered more away from the plants, though I love them, to more of the graphic communication and signage and wayfinding and all of those sorts of things. And I've been able to take that knowledge and experience and use that in the library and help make signage and help, understand a three-dimensional space so that people can have a good experience in the library and understand where they are or where they need to go. One of my favorite designers had a saying, which was to his thought about graphic design was to inform and delight. And so that's one of the things that I really try to do. Even if you're making something very simple, you're trying to communicate clearly, but you're also trying to maybe bring a smile to someone's face, so they're going to really enjoy the colors or the drawings or anything like that. And that was Milton Glaser, who just recently passed away. So that's something that I try to bring to a lot of the graphic design work that I do.
I love that you talked a lot about, to jump back just a little bit, the storytelling in architecture and landscape design, and it being an emotionally evocative or like a thought-provoking experience. I'm like a low-level architecture geek. My grandfather was a civil engineer and architect who studied in the same school as Frank Lloyd Wright, or the school that was inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. So he designed and built several buildings in Jackson County, including his own house. And that started from an early age for me, learning about architecture and different buildings. And that experience with my dad and his siblings of going through, these buildings that he's built or these houses that he's built, and then springing off into that and going and, touring a bunch of Frank Lloyd Wright's houses around the country, or even just knowing what I know about the different styles of architecture. I really love that. And the places that I love to go. So Washington, D.C. has a lot of different types of architecture, especially with the Smithsonian Institutes.
Right.
So I really love that. And that's always been a really emotionally connective experience for me. And that's something that I'm glad that you touched on, because that doesn't get talked a lot about with architecture, of like, there's that conception that buildings they do have to be accurate, and they do have to be, there's a lot of science and math and very solid skills that go into it, but there is also an artistic flair to it too.
Right.
Which I really love.
One of the design firm that I worked for many years had a philosophy about how to bring together all of those things, from the economic part of it, making sure that a project works, to the environmental or the sustainability portion of it, making sure that we're doing smart things for the environment, not just in terms of plant selection, but in terms of placement of buildings and understanding the site or the area and the climate, and also bringing in the community aspects of it. So how are they going to use the space? How are they going to interact with it? How are they going to move through it? how are they going to emotionally connect to a place? And then that also brings in sort of the aesthetics of the place. So what does it look like? So bringing all of those things together are what really sort of makes successful projects in three-dimensional space. And I would say for any project, actually, sort of thinking about all of those aspects makes things as robust as they can be.
Yeah. To kind of switch gears a little bit, one of the other reasons why we wanted to have you on is you mentioned a little bit that you got into textile arts, and that was your path creatively. It seems from the way that you've put it really organic, and I love watching the way that's or hearing about the ways that that's changed over the course of your life. But I've been the most geeked about your textile art because you took one of my embroidery classes.
I did.
Was it 3 years ago or 2 years ago? It was
two.
I think two.
Yeah.
And I was when I ran across Amanda a couple weeks later, she was showing me these pieces that she had embroidered after the class, and they're absolutely spectacular. Like, they're so pretty.
Thank
you.
Was
just absolutely, this is one of the first experience I had of teaching somebody and watching like what the product coming out of that was. And it was so cool. I was really excited.
I remember being very excited to show you. And I don't know I have never considered myself growing up a crafty person. I don't know how to sew. Like sewing on buttons was a disaster. Like, I mean, they would be on there, but if you flipped it over, it would be a bird's nest behind there. And as long as it stayed on, it was fine with me. My grandmother sewed beautifully. That never translated down. I had never thought to knit or crochet. Or needlepoint. I had just a terrible experience in needlepoint in Girl Scouts in elementary school, which I think scarred me for a long time. And I don't know what it was that made me sort of look for an embroidery class at the library. I think it was, and I must have seen something online with like, oh, I can do that. And what I wanted to be able to do is take my line drawings. I like to work in pen and ink sometimes, and trying to translate that into thread and then to incorporate color and other things. I like to do watercolor. I'm self-taught in a lot of these sort of more drawing and watercolor types of work. And so I ended up, taking your class, and it was super approachable. And, we left with a little bit of stuff, right? So I could continue to practice, which was wonderful. And the other thing that I really liked about embroidery is that the barrier to entry is very low. Like it's really inexpensive to get started. You just need a few things and to know a few stitches, and then you can have a lot of fun with it. So I ended up practicing a lot of very simple things. And then what I wanted to end up doing was start bringing in watercolor and figuring out how to do that on fabric. So a lot, some failures for sure. But one of the pieces that I really like was bringing in some of my Gen X music interests from the 80s. And I ended up doing this watercolor of Crowded House album art, and then using watercolor pencils to color in some of that area, and then using a little bit of water to help sort of soften that. So that was a lot of fun. When I tried regular watercolor, I never got the water to pigment ratio quite right. And it would bleed around to more areas than I wanted. And then I did, everyone has seen this in some sort of form or another. But this is the album art for Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures, which I'm sure we've all seen on t-shirts and stuff, but that took a long time.
Yeah. That's in my mind. When you first showed me that, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
So I tend to just use, kind of one stitch. I like a split back stitch because it just helps give me a really thin line. And I in a lot of the work that I do, I like to use just one thread of embroidery floss. It's rare that I use anything more. Sometimes maybe two if I'm doing a knot of some sort, because with one thread, it's just super annoying. And then I like to make this my little dragon thing there. Super cute. So I like to do maybe some things. What was nice with embroidery is that seeing that there's so many non-traditional ways to do it now, and there's no one right or wrong form of embroidery, and just seeing that in lots of books and online, and it's just basically whatever you want to make out of thread and fabric, go for it. I've started doing. I haven't touched my embroidery in a really long time, which I'm seeing this all now, I feel really bad about. I had a bunch of old jeans. And so I was doing just this sort of more intuitive bubble forms on a pair of denim. I love that. That's really, it's tough. Like it's hard on my fingers. Yeah. So I don't work on it all that often. And then just the last little piece that I have here is just, again, just more intuitive. When I sit down and do it, I don't work from patterns or anything. I will sometimes have a sketch in my head, or I'll sketch it out on paper, or I've already done a drawing and then I want to try it in thread. Or I just do something like this, which is just a bunch of,
wow.
These are all,
I love that effect.
They are not
French knots.
These are, these are not French knots, they're colonial knots.
Oh yeah. There's, for folks at home, French knots are 3 twists, colonial knots are 2 twists around your needle, for anybody that embroiders. Or there's
I didn't know that. I just kind of do whatever I want. When I sometimes do 3, I do 4, I don't know.
So the way that I was seeing it is that the way that the floss wraps around the needle is slightly different. Yes. And I was much more successful
I'll have to look this
with the colonial knot in getting a consistent size and not having them like pull down through the fabric. And so I've of course forgotten how to do that now because I haven't touched that in months, but so I'll have to just go back to YouTube again and then watch somebody do it. So yeah, so I've had a lot of fun with this. And the other thing I like about embroidery projects is that you don't need a special space to work on them. You don't need a lot of extra tools, although as I've learned more, it's like, oh, I'd like one of those stands that holds it for me. Yeah. Especially when you're doing knots. But or you can just sit on the sofa or go outside or sit in the park and do it, which isn't always the case for painting, although you can take little travel sets outside. It's just nice to be able to throw something like that in a bag, and then you have something that you can do with your hands.
And you can dip into it just for a few minutes too. It's not like the setup, like a plein air, project.
Right. Yeah. Again, the commitment the barrier is much lower. So, I just have my little bag sitting next to my sofa, and I'll sometimes, have it again in a while, but just pick it up and work on it for a little while. And it was always a really nice thing to sort of decompress from work and looking at a screen all day, like I do, working on digital art, graphic design stuff. It's nice to have something real in your hand to work on.
What I do love about like the self-teaching idea, because I was thinking about this the other day when I was knitting, because I certainly have the wrong technique, or wrong. I have improper probably technique. Like I would not be the one to do a video to teach you how to knit, because the way I'm holding the yarn or the fiber is not generally the way typically people hold it. Like I'm probably doing more movement than I need to, but it works for me. So it's like, well, it doesn't really matter, because I'm enjoying what I'm doing and I'm getting it done, and it works, and that's fine, even though it's like improper. So yeah, I like that freedom to just figure it out. So
right.
I heard somebody online say that they didn't like the right and wrong aspect of like how you learn or how you craft or how you create. That it's you're not doing what's textbook, or you're going off book a little bit of how you do things. And I was like, I like that phrase. It kind of takes the stress for me out of like, because I'm a deep perfectionist, and that's I'm really bad about that, but and being hard on myself when something's not going the way I want it to. Yes. So I was like, that kind of releases a little bit of the stress for me of like, it's not textbook, it's the way that I'm doing it, this is the way that I'm expressing it. So yeah,
I felt exactly the same way about a lot of the work that I've done for a long time, is that if it's not exactly right the first time I do it, I would just let it go. And I think some of that may have come from that traumatic Girl Scouts experience, because we were learning, and I'm left-handed, and I was being taught right-handed, and I couldn't get it. And everyone was frustrated. And so I just left. Like, that was it for me. So, and I, even through, growing up and doing other drawing stuff, if the drawing isn't turning out exactly like I want, I would rip it out and throw it away. But learning this stuff, along with a couple other things that I do outside of work, has taught me a lot more patience, and recognizing that it's the practice of it that allows you to get better. Like, I'm not going to be perfect at it. And I just have to have the patience with myself to just keep practicing, and then noticing those improvements is like a huge reward mentally. And then it encourages me to keep going. And it's not just with, the craft and art stuff, but other things too. So they sort of, that idea or philosophy or mindset shift for myself has really helped in lots of different ways.
Yeah, that's really, that we talk a lot about that, like, process, not product, and that continued self-teaching and self-learning, and like being able to, even if you knit, like I think we've talked about knitting almost a whole scarf or finishing it and being like, I don't really like it, but I know I learned something here, even if it was learning how to take it apart, and I think there is that whole idea of trying to be easier on yourself and a little kinder. And I think like embroidery is great. My first experience with embroidery was through a creative bug challenge that we did. Because I'd always been intimidated by it, which is funny because I used to work in a needlepoint store like that. That's where I was coming from. And needlepoint does have to be perfect, like there's not, and embroidery is so open to interpretation. And I was so pleasantly surprised to learn that it was like doodling with thread. And I love that you've really taken it in that direction. Like, this is a picture I have in my mind, or this is something I've drawn. And
it makes me slow down too, because you can't do any of this fast, particularly weaving or this. It takes a lot of time, and like with the with this one, just sticking with it. And it was hard to maybe not see so much progress and just like pick it up and work on it and then put it back down. But then seeing the final product, that made that whole process worth it. And, I just have a whole pile of these sitting around. I mean, I didn't have any great plan about what I was going to do with all of them afterwards, but I have them up in my apartment. I used to have them at my desk, but I brought them all home when we started working from home a year ago. So I can enjoy them here.
Yeah. That's one thing that's been my goal for a little bit of the last course. So a lot of my embroidery was being gifted. So that's my personal goal of like, I'm going to finish more projects that I'm actually going to hang in my home. Because I love that look of a bunch of hoop art or embroidery hoops hung with embroidery. So I'm like 3 hoops into like maybe 10 that I wanted to do of all different varying sizes. So great. I love that as like an art thing for me personally. But you mentioned weaving, and I do want to touch on that because you do really lovely weaving, and I love the work that you do. So
thank you. Yeah, this was another quarantine special. So last, just sort of plug another ADL class. So the one that the embroidery class that I took with you, Nancy, that was in person a couple of years ago, which was great. And then last year, again, it was one of those things where, for a few weeks or months ahead of when Heidi had you had your class about how to start weaving with a cardboard loom, I had just been thinking about it. And again, one of the things that I love working with in my artwork is color and texture and pattern. And I was always curious to work with yarn as a medium, but I was never interested in knitting. Like I didn't want to knit my own sweater. I didn't want to knit a scarf. I love when other people do it, but it wasn't something that I felt called to do in any way. So I think, but I wanted to have that sort of textural experience. So after
I love what you were just doing with your fingers.
Yeah. I've been trying not to talk with my hands as much. It's distracting.
Oh, I love it.
But then I think it was in April. It was within the first month or so after we had moved all the programming online, and you were doing a cardboard weaving, and I had, for whatever reason, I think I had purchased it for wrapping holiday gifts. I had this ball of yarn, random ball of yarn. I don't even know what it's made out of. It could be cotton. I don't know. But I wrap gifts with that, because if I wrap them with and make bows out of like the curly ribbon, my cat eats it. And so she doesn't touch yarn, which is funny. So I wrapped them, I made bows with yarn, and I had this leftover ball of yarn. And I had cardboard because everybody was ordering things online in March and April last year. So I had the stuff that I needed to get started, and it was super easy. And I really enjoyed myself. And it was so calming. It's not always calming if you're trying to figure something out, but just this sort of motion of the weft going back and forth was super pleasing, and I really liked it. And then I went out, I bought a little starter kit. I found someone on Etsy selling a little kit with, and it was just tiny. It's teeny tiny. It was sort of like just a wood version of the cardboard loom. So lots of little notches at the top and the bottom. And it came with all the stuff I needed to get started. So just little bits of lots of colors of yarn and some needles, because I was like, I have sort of information overload at the store. Like you see everything in front of you, and I'm just like, my brain shuts down. And so just give me what I need to get started, and I can figure it out from there. So I got a couple little needles, a little, so the little metal needle and a longer wood one. And I really enjoyed it. And so then after that, I leveled up to some larger things to work on. And weaving can get very expensive as opposed to embroidery, just because yarn gets expensive. The looms are bonkers. So I just went with, just the regular silly little frames from Michael's, or the canvas, and I cut the canvas off. And used that. I looked up some YouTube classes and figured out how to do that, and just started weaving lots of small things. I have a very small apartment. It's about 620 square feet. So I've turned my dining area over there into my art studio, because I don't eat at my dining table, so I might as well use it for something. And so I used an old easel, a little travel easel, and used that and put my looms, my do-it-yourself looms on those. And I just started making lots of small little things. This was one of my very first, this is dirty because I actually use it as a coaster at my desk. Little projects. I just call them tiny tapestries.
That's sweet.
So, and most of these, I have a pile too, and there's so many that are left unfinished. I think that's one of my goals, is to finish things and not just like half finish them, but starting to figure out how to just, make things organic. Again, I don't work with patterns. I might sketch something out ahead of time. I bought the colors of yarn that I really love, and I just make different things with them. So this is just, again, really just organic shapes, again, all unfinished. I've started tucking in all the tails on the back so that I like this really clean look to it, as opposed to with the hanging them. One of the things I'd like to do is figure out how to put them in frames, sort of to mount them to some sort of backing, and then just have them in frames like a painting would be. So playing with different forms that are wobbly and blobby, and then figuring out how I can sort of make little reference pieces for myself for how colors work together. So this is actually one of my favorite little pieces, which is just a gradient of color.
It's just so satisfying.
Yeah.
Right.
It is really satisfying.
Yeah, it's nice and regular. And I ended up making a little set of coasters with this sort of same motif, with just like 3 or 4 little strips for friends for Christmas. And I bought myself this, which I really love. It's just this little tiny loom that has, this sort of threaded rod through the middle of it. And it's sort of like a lap loom, but you can adjust how tall it is. And I like making small things.
I love that loom because you can tighten it as you weave. That's really, I get really frustrated with weaving, or at least I have. So you mentioned the fact that like looms are bonkers expensive. So weaving got me into a lot of trouble because I'm looking at them online. I'm like, oh, I really want one, but we're in the middle of quarantine. I'm going to just make one. I have power tools. I have, I know how to do some of this stuff. I'm going to make one. And it was the longest, most excruciating process of trial and error that I think I've had so far with like actually making something out of wood. Because the first time I made it out of balsa wood, which was the dumbest thing. And it warped really badly. The frame did when I warped it up. So I was like, okay, well, I'll use like poplar or oak or something for that. And like the second one went really, really well, but with the way that I did the notches, it was really hard to cut the weaving from the loom the way I wanted it to.
Right.
So I was running into all these trials of like, it's not working out the way I wanted to. I couldn't figure out how to change colors in a way that looked really cohesive. Mm-hmm. So like I have a weaving on the wall behind me. It's really bubbly and kind of warped and it doesn't look spectacular, but the colors are really pretty. So I was like, well, I'll keep those the way it is. But it's something that I know I need to practice more with, but I have a very low patience threshold. Yeah. So like working with, I like the idea of working with tinier things to try to build up my skills a little bit more. Hindsight, I should have done more small projects to kind of teach myself.
One thing I can say about building looms, years and years ago, the person my partner at the time, built a basic frame loom for me, and he used a door spring instead of creating notches. So his door string stretched, so it'll stretch to be, consistent in spacing, and you can use that to thread your work through, and that worked really well.
One of the things that I just started sort of diving in online and finding people who were doing a really nice job teaching online via YouTube or whatever. Some people make them out of copper pipes.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Which are and you can tension those. But that involves, again, I don't have, and Nancy, I so admired your like how to build a loom thing. And that's something maybe someday I could try. But again, in a space that's really small, I don't have power tools. I certainly don't have soldering or welding equipment to make a copper pipe loom. But the tensioning on that small one that I purchased for myself last year has made a nice difference, because I know it's a little bit more consistent than what I can get by sort of doing the figure 8 warping on the frame. And then it is frustrating. One of the things that I practice a lot is getting even tension. And one of the things I discovered, particularly on this piece, was because this is super bubbly too, which is probably not carrying across on the screen very well, but this is 2 different types of yarn and one is thicker than the other. I don't know a lot about yarn. And so they were different, and I was trying to get the same number of rows in, and it was working so hard. And so you can see the edges have bulged out on the sides as a result of that. But I ended up, I stick mostly now with a worsted weight wool that I really like working with. And I just use a one sort of thread. The other ones that I started, I got a friend sent me a whole bunch of a different kind of yarn that she was just she had too much in her stash, which I know you guys have all talked about before too, is sort of like destashing and all of that stuff, is working with some very simple black and white patterns as well. And I've been trying to work through frustrations of understanding what hills and valleys are in weaving, and trying to get, either the smooth look or the stepped look, and how to sort of anticipate that and plan in advance, which is something that is just beyond my skill level at this point. So I'll get there. But this is also a really nice yarn that you can double and triple up or quadruple up different strands of it, if that's what it's called in wool or in yarn.
I'm laughing because I have the same struggle of like, I don't know how to make the smooth shapes. I'm not quite there yet, but no, I had that same issue with the different weights with the weaving that I just finished, because I'm looking at all these weavings online on Instagram and Pinterest and all these tutorials on YouTube, and I'm like, well, these weavers are using like wool roving, which is really, really thick, and they're using fingering weight yarn, and they're going back and forth, and it looks gorgeous, and it looks completely flat and like spectacular. Okay, I can do that, no problem. No, that's not what happened when I finished, because it looks great on the loom and then it didn't afterwards. But and it's, for me, it's learning. I like to pack my weaving as tightly as you do, and I think that's what kind of got me into trouble with the different weights, was that letting the warp shift with the different weights and not packing it in so tightly, I think would have helped with the bubbling. But I don't like that look so much, so it's something that I want to start playing with, of like, how do I get the look that I want but not bubbling. So
it's I that's the other nice thing about working small, is that if something's not going well, it's not going to take too long to just be done with it, and then I can move on to something else. I just need a bunch more of those tiny little looms, but I'm just going to buy the one.
Yeah.
So you were saying at the beginning that, like, you didn't think of yourself as like a crafty person, but has that changed for you now? Do you think that it's not, I mean, with what the work you're doing now, or over the past years with this kind of stuff, does it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, yes, I consider myself a little bit craftier. I still don't think that I get or understand other certain types of crafts, but I also don't need to. Like, I'm fine. I've got my little lane right now, and I'm really happy in it. And I'm enjoying the stuff that I'm making. I'm enjoying the stuff that other people make that might be in mediums that I don't plan to work in. But what I've enjoyed the most is, which is funny to think, even though, because we've all been home alone for a year, is what supportive a community it is in encouraging and reacting to and sharing all sorts of different types of creativity. And so I think that personally over this past year has been a thing that's really helped me sort of weather the work from home and all of the sort of the solitude of it. So connecting with other people, doing creative things is really nice. So yeah, I consider myself crafty in some ways. I think what I like to, think about is that I've got this, I think of myself, I guess, maybe more as a designer who is working in certain crafts. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to define it, but I was like, I definitely feel like you are being crafty, but I do like that point about like the community aspect, and I almost feel like in a backwards sort of way that we're more connected because of the situation that we've been in over the past year of not being around each other and maybe having more time to spend in these crafty endeavors or whatever. It's just that more people have come to it and are more engaged with it than maybe you normally would have time for, working 40 hours a week.
Right. Exactly. And I think that, yeah, that's something, and it's kept me sort of going and wanting to learn more. And, one of the next things that I want to figure out is, because I am sort of piling these all up, and I've just considered them more or less experiments for myself, and playing and testing and doing different things. I like sharing them with friends. I've given them away as gifts. My mom keeps taking embroidery from me, which is fine because then I don't have it anymore. One of the things I would like to investigate in the future is, selling some of it, making things for other people with tiny commissions or something. But it's not certainly why I got into it. It's for me, it's still been more of a really nice, just sort of this textile stuff, a respite from the computer. Even though most recently I've gotten back into practicing digital illustration in a different way than I do for work. So right when everything shut down last year, I ordered an iPad for myself, which I had never had before, so that I could work with sort of the digital illustration softwares. And so that's been a really nice other thing to sort of add to the mix, because it's sort of, I can pick up and work on whatever sort of thing I feel like working on that day, sort of wherever my mind is or wherever my level of patience is. I can just pick a different type of activity that is, even though the iPad is digital, sort of away from my computer, away from my desk, and doing some sorts of different things. So one of the things I've really been challenging myself with recently, and not giving up because it's not perfect right away, and allowing it to take the amount of time it needs to take to be done, is drawing birds, which are really hard. They're so hard to draw. But I think, when I do drawings, I expect them to be perfect and done, like in the same setting, the same session of drawing, which is impossible. And so I've allowed myself the time it takes to finish drawing birds. And right now I've just been practicing from photos that I've seen online. But then also allowing myself the freedom of what's nice drawing digitally is that I'm not wasting paper necessarily. So, I don't, the preciousness of a sketchbook is a little bit lessened because I can just delete a layer. So I've been doing a lot of really loose, fast sketches too, to sort of just like let go of the perfectionism part of it. Doesn't mean I don't try it a couple times first before I save it and export it and share it. But allowing sort of the imperfections to be part of the final drawing in the loose sketches has been really nice. So I think of anything over this past year is just sort of allowing my creativity to expand a little bit, and to practice more patience with myself has been really nice. So, and I've enjoyed all of the chats that all of you have had, and sort of experiencing different things that people do, and learning different things has really been super helpful.
Oh, well, thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a light beam going through my window that's just like really distracting me.
Thanks to the time change that just happened.
Yeah,
definitely. But I think the last question that I had is we've talked about all the different mediums that you've worked through. We kind of like touch base with. Do you see kind of like a shift in what you're interested in working on by the season, or do you just kind of does it just kind of go organically?
It's hard to know so far, just because I just started weaving last year. One of the things that I really like doing was taking my whole sort of like shebang outside on my balcony and working outside, which is really nice. I think that's probably more of what I look forward to again seasonally, is being able to take my project work outside and work on it. These pieces are small enough that, it's not like I'm covered in a wool blanket or a wool sweater that I'm knitting, and then it's July, and that just sounds terrible. I don't know. I think,
yeah.
but I don't know. I think a lot of it is just sort of on maybe a week to week sort of or basis of sort of where my mind is and the other work that I'm doing, and what do I need to do to sort of balance that. So if a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is very screen heavy for a particular week, I may really want to step away, sit someplace physically different from my desk that I'm at all the time, and work on something else, both a physical and mental change of scenery is usually what's helpful for me. But I'll be curious to see sort of like, now that we're into a whole, change of the seasons again, what might be different. Has that been sort of your experience as well? Or do you have like sort of a seasonal thing of what you guys like to work on? Because you all work in so many different types of things, way more than I do. So I'm curious how
you're talking about like staying in your lane, and I'm like,
know.
I don't even think I'm on the road half the time.
No, I'm not even on the road anymore.
And it's fine.
Yeah.
I like that question, because I do see a really dramatic shift in what I want to work on seasonally. So like fall and winter, I'm immediately like everything knitting all the time. I want, like warm, snuggly things. And to the point of like, I'm regretting that I'm not working on knitting stuff elsewhere in the year, so I don't have more warm, cuddly things to wear. Colder months. End up like getting frustrated with myself of like, I'm just not finishing projects fast enough. But and then more in the warmer months, a lot of sewing. Like I really want to work on my sewing machine and sew a lot. And then the embroidery seems to be a little bit more of a warmer weather thing for me. So yeah, that's kind of the way that things shift for me a little bit.
Yeah, I knit all year long. I just, yeah. So it doesn't always coincide. Like I'm about to finish a sweater and then I won't be able to wear it, but that's okay.
Yeah. But something to look forward to. Then it's like a whole, like, it's a surprise then in the fall.
Right.
Do you work in different types of yarn, or do you usually do you work in mostly wool? Like, would that change at all during the summer? Or if you're doing crochet, is that a different kind of yarn?
That's something that I want to experiment with, actually. A lot of the yarn that I have and acquire is wool, like 90% of it is wool, because wool is a little bit easier to get your hands on, especially for the hand-dyed yarn that I really like, because I've invested a lot of money and time in curating a stash of yarn that I really like. But I really want to experiment with like cotton and bamboo yarns for summer weight garments. Because I'm starting to plan forward for like what I want in my wardrobe long term. So more of a slow fashion approach to creating. I really want to play with that, because cotton and bamboo yarns behave much, much differently than wool does. Just with the way that the fabric will drape, or the forms it will want to hold. Bamboo is really drapey. It's not as structured. It doesn't stay together as much as wool does. It slips and slides a little bit, and cotton behaves a little bit differently than that. But yeah, that's something that I've wanted to play with, for the sole reason of I want to be able to wear my knitwear year round.
Right.
And like, I know that acrylic fabrics and acrylic yarns really, really overheat me.
Yeah.
So it's like, I want to play with that a little bit to see if I can move away from some of the acrylic and polyester that's in my wardrobe. So
cotton and bamboo sounds like such a lovely thing to wear in the summer.
It does. It really does. And
even though it's a knit, there's just a lot of like lightness and like air movement and almost more cooling than just something else might be.
Yeah. I love my cotton sweaters. I have a couple of them that I've been able to pick up from stores that I just love them in the summertime, even though they're black, like most of the things in my wardrobe. They're still really, really comfortable, and I like them a lot. So
yeah, I love working with color. I do it on the screen. I do it with the yarn and stitching, but I wear mostly gray and black too.
Yeah. I think that's all we had to talk about today. We're running on our hour where we usually cut stuff off. So thank you, Amanda, for joining us. This was a really fun conversation to have with you today, and we're super, super happy you were able to join us for the podcast today. So
thanks. I had fun.
Awesome.
Me too. Now I can look up things about colonial and French knots, and
I know. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I've got notes on that of like I want to go back and look at that and see what the difference is. So
well, and I can't wait to be able to share more stuff with all of you. Hopefully we get to see each other in person again in the coming months, and I look forward to coming to like a program with other people about textiles. So I think that I'm looking forward to that quite a bit.
Yeah, I know I am. That's definitely something that I'm looking forward to. So hopefully, fingers crossed, sometime in the near future. So we'll just have to wait and see. But thank you everyone for joining us today for Crafty Chat. This is episode 33. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and don't forget to love each other. Bye, everybody.